Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Ali, and thank you to you and your team for putting on a really special conference and getting together some of the thought leaders and investors and the future leaders of this industry all together in one room. I thought I'd take you through a little bit of a journey. As Ali mentioned, I've had some experience with revolutionary technologies, and that's in the space of very light a year. And we've had the great opportunity to watch this entire segment go from nothing to something. And there's quite a few lessons learned that are directly applicable to the eVTOL segment. So before I jump into talking about business jets, I want to talk about what you see on the screen. How many of you ever owned or tried to fly a gas-powered radio-controlled helicopter? Okay. I would assume most of you probably crashed one of those as well. They are bloody really hard to fly. I probably spent my entire childhood allowance on trying to fix these things after they had crashed. They're really loud, they're difficult to control, and frankly, that business never really took off. When you go to an RC field, you always see a lot more airplanes there than you would see helicopters because it was particularly difficult to fly. But then these things came along. Drones, where now that's what everybody's talking about. But if you think about it, it's not really that big of a difference between what you're looking at here and what we looked at on the previous screen. But if you look at what's happened to this market, and here's DJI, the largest manufacturer of drones in the world, their time history plot of their deliveries, this is without question an exponential trend. And if you look forward to what's projected by Business Intelligence for the next few years, we're looking at over 30 million units delivered by 2021. That is incredible. And so I asked the question, and I know many have as well, as to why. Why is it that you had a drone, pretty much a drone, a radio-controlled gas-powered helicopter, but never saw anywhere like what we've seen in terms of the growth that we see in drones? So the first thing is what Nikhil talked about before, this distributed electric propulsion system, which gives you two things. One is reduced acquisition costs because you've got much fewer moving parts, and two, significantly reduced direct operating costs because you're battery powered. Then battery life. We've seen battery life go to a new level where these things are actually usable. It's not a 5-minute flight. In fact, there's a drone that was just announced at the last drone show that can fly for 2 hours. It totally changes the game in terms of utility for these things. And the third one, and this isn't one that we haven't really talked about much here, or just really in general, is inexpensive, highly advanced control systems. The brains that are driving these drones are technologies that have been iterated over many, 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 many years that allow a 5-year-old to fly a drone and not crash it. Or anybody can get behind the controls of a radio-controlled drone and not crash it. Where if you go back to that radio-controlled helicopter, you needed many years of training before you could be safe to go do that unless you wanted to buy a bunch. So now let's talk about the people side of the story. Earlier on stage, Elon Musk's name was brought up. And it's hard to imagine that Porsche today would be building that electric car they're talking about, or Mercedes, or Ford, or all these car companies would be pursuing electric technology with the gusto they are today had it not been for this man. Will Tesla be successful in the long term? Who knows? I've owned 2 of them. They're awesome cars, and I hope they are very successful. But if he were to stop today, Elon has left his mark. And all major industries, in fact, this slide comes from a speech where he said something really interesting at the TED conference was, technology doesn't just evolve. It takes individual people that really want to evolve that technology. That's why we haven't really had any change in space technology for quite a while. And his decision to take on electric cars. So as part of that story, as we go back into history a little bit, there's a guy who, in my opinion, was kind of like the Elon Musk of the very light jet industry, and his name was Vern Rayburn. And for those of you that don't know Vern Rayburn, he is an incredible human being. He was the 16th employee at Microsoft, helped Bill Gates build that company, was very successful in the tech world. Many of you in the room may know him or have known him. And he set on a vision to create the perfect personal jet. And I worked for the man. He hired me right out of school in 2003. I was a propulsion systems engineer for Eclipse Aviation, was a flight test engineer, later went on to be a salesman for them, and then jetAVIVA as a company, we were originally operators of Eclipses. We had over 30 Eclipses under contract to operate in air taxi. Clearly the story changed as it relates to what happened from there. This was an incredible airplane, and he was an incredible guy. He was able to fire start the industry by virtue of setting a big dream, a vision about what transportation could look and feel like. Jumping into a jet for $837,500, put a little ad in the Wall Street Journal about this big, said, own a jet for less than $1 million, ? I personally sold 5 jets the next day, just from that little ad, because he was able to create this vision for folks that everybody said it couldn't work and it wouldn't work. In many ways it didn't, but in a lot of ways it did, and we'll talk about how it did. But Vern is, he's somewhat of a divisive character. Some people love him, some people hate him, much like Elon Musk. A lot of people lost a lot of money through the Eclipse thing, but a whole new industry was kicked off by the virtue of this one guy that raised over $1 billion, was able to put together a world-class team of innovators, of engineers, of suppliers. Fuji Heavy Industries was building wings. I'm sorry, Mitsubishi was building the wings. Every major OEM was part of this project from a supplier level that he was able to convince to get into it. So there's a few things that made this airplane really interesting. One was integrated systems and integrated manufacturing technologies. For some of you may remember friction stir welding. Eclipse owned the patent on that, was allowed it to be manufactured at fast rates, which allowed us to have lower acquisition costs and lower direct operating cost. Avio, this was a big deal. This was the fully integrated cockpit suite, which made this jet so easy to fly. For those of you who may have had the opportunity to fly the jet, it's incredible. You literally start the engines and just go. There's nothing to do. And he was able to make the user experience very easy so that owner pilots with very little jet experience could step into it and go flying. And the third was the EJ22 jet engine, which eventually was transformed over to the Pratt & Whitney 610, which gave you the utility, very efficient motors. So there's a few parallels that we saw from the drone helicopter revolution to the VLJ side and what we're experiencing today. But let's go down memory lane. Some of you may remember some of these airplanes, and there were more, but this is all I could fit on the screen so that you could see. But when Eclipse was announced in early 2000, and he did it with such success, and they saw that the market go, wow, I can get a jet for $1 million, everybody jumped in. And unfortunately, the history and the story associated with these programs is pretty telling. I'll stop on the Spectrum. This was the S-33. This is a product that was developed by Lyndon Blue. Lyndon Blue is the guy that started a company by the name of General Atomics, makes the Predator. These folks know what they're doing. They're one of the largest manufacturers of large-scale drones in the world. During flight test, the ailerons were connected incorrectly. Test pilots were killed. The program was shut down. ATG Javelin. This was a super cool little personal fighter jet. They got a ton of orders. They were developing them up in Colorado, but ultimately they shut down the program. The Piper jet. This was an established OEM who built Piper Meridians, Piper Cubs, been around for 100 years, and eventually they decided to shut down the Piper jet program. So the graveyard is pretty well littered of people that jumped in on this fad. We were talking about the hype curve earlier. Well, there was definitely a hype curve as it related to VLJs. Then let's go down to the success. So, the Cessna Mustang, 475 of those jets built. I say success sort of because the airplane never really made money. Even at $3 million, Cessna barely eked out any profit on the airplane. The majority of them were sold for well below that. Where this has been successful for Cessna is that it was a loss leader to get people into the Citation product line and then move up from there. Embraer with a Phenom 100. Awesome, great airplane. In fact, Alex Wilcox is here somewhere, who started Jet Suite with a fleet of Phenom 100s. Probably the biggest impact of the Phenom 100 is not it's the Phenom 300. The Phenom 300 would have never been developed if it wasn't for the Phenom 100, and the 300, as many may know, is the mainstay of NetJet's fleet, flight options, and #1 selling jet for the last 4 or 5 years. Hondajet, there was a mention of Hondajet earlier. Nobody really knows what Honda has invested into this other than it's been in development for 20 plus years. My guess is it's in many billions. They've sold roughly 50 of them, and relatively limited production. There's not a lot of these going out the door. And then this last one. For those of you that were at CJI, was at January, I think it was, my thesis was that this is probably the most interesting, cool airplane in operation today, the Cirrus Jet. And it was the very last one certified out of this entire group. There's about 600 orders of these for $2.5 million, roughly. Very easy to fly, very low operating cost, and it wasn't the first to market, it was the last to market. Interesting, and it's being built by the largest manufacturer of single-engine airplanes in the world, Cirrus. They have over 7,000 airplanes in production today. So that whole story, I mean, people dropped off at a lot of different exit points. Some dropped off at the certification point, some dropped off at the manufacturing point, the pilot training service. Each one of these are such different businesses. And to imagine a startup company learning how to do each one of these well is a really big challenge. And so my hat's off to all those companies that have been able to do it in the past, but they're very few and far between. So from the VLJ side, a few interesting insights. One, almost all investors lost their money. That's like a real thing. From even the OEMs, Cessna and Embraer and all that, I mean, it's hard to see how they recoup their investment in those individual products, but certainly all the startups. But the consumers, the ones that actually took delivery of airplanes, every one of them won, for the most part, because those airplanes were being heavily subsidized by all these investors. And first to market was not a good thing. Culture, this is a big deal, and it's as appropriate being here to talk about it. There was a lot of culture of Silicon Valley tech improvement and all that kind of stuff with the speed that people are used to in Silicon Valley being applied to aviation, and those cultures being completely in conflict, and it was a real big challenge. I saw it firsthand at Eclipse, and you're seeing it now today. And it was clear that this is way harder than anybody has ever thought it would be to design, certify, build, support these individual airplanes. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into the eVTOL market. I opened up talking about Verne. Well, today, in my opinion, there are 3 folks that have had the impact, like Elon Musk had in flying cars, that are having an impact today that, in my opinion, actually none of their names are talked about today so far. First is Jeff Holden. Jeff was the chief product officer of Uber, had a very long, extensive career at Amazon and Groupon, and was the guy that really pushed and had the political capital within Uber to make flying cars and eVTOL a household name, whereas 2 years ago, it wasn't. And is Nikhil in the room? If he's not, with Nikhil, who wrote the white paper and has pretty much leading the Elevate program, we owe them a lot, because they've made this topic a real thing for people to believe that it's not just another pipe dream. Second person is Larry Page. Larry Page has been long on this space for a long time, close to 10 years. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And the third person is Martine Rothblatt. Martine is one of the most incredible human beings I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. Was the founder of Sirius XM Radio. Daughter had cancer, got a PhD in that issue to develop a company to solve the issue, and now is the CEO of United Therapeutics, is I think the highest paid medical CEO in the world, and is very long in this space as well. And we'll talk about how. Since the beginning of this year, over $1 billion has been invested in aviation startups. This is incredible. I don't have the previous year's data, but it's nowhere near this. And a lot of it's going into this space and the infrastructure around it. It's been talked about throughout the meeting, but what's interesting, the dates, the eVTOLs in development from September of 17 that were public was about 15 or so, and now today there's close to 120. I mean, if this isn't an exponential trend, I don't know what is. This certainly can't continue because eventually there's going to be a wind down of who's making what, but this period of time is pretty extraordinary. There's a list of every one of these on transportup.com. There's a place where you can look and see each one. They're being tracked, where you can understand and see all the different configurations. But it is incredible to see the amount of creative thought into each one of these unique designs. Some are pipe dreams, some are incredibly clever, and we'll talk about some of those clever ones in a second. I thought I'd dive into some of the more interesting ones, if you will, that are a little bit further along. And of course, Airbus has got several programs that they're working on. The Kitiok products, all 3 of the top right are Larry Page's products. Joby, and Jobin is in the room. It's probably the most interesting one, and so on and so forth. But some pretty incredible, unique products that are pretty far along in the development cycle. A few weeks ago, I had the good pleasure to co-host an event with Ben Marcus, who's the chairman of AirMap, which is the leader in low airspace management for drones, and Stuart Walton of the Walton-Walmart family in Bentonville, Arkansas. We brought together a lot of the world's leaders in this space, and I thought I'd show you just a quick video about that event and some of the things that we took away from it.
Gucci to the Wright brothers, the human condition is predisposed to ascent. Mankind climbs. From the earliest days of flight, taking to the skies was the urge to be better. Whether for joy, for country, for peace, or for purpose, the ascent captivated the human desire. The desire made us climb further, faster, higher, and safer. So how are we going to continue the climb? We're taking the best minds from aviation, aerospace, automotive, regulators, government, and business, and we're merging them to create an entirely new industry. By leveraging the last 100 years of aerospace technology and finding new ways to solve the dilemma of flight, we've been able to create what no one thought we could. We've challenged the definition of an airplane. We've redefined the idea of mobility, and we're doing it faster than ever before. We're cross-developing in so many different ways. We're applying our ride-sharing technologies to the eVTOL industry. We're advancing aerodynamic design. We're creating partnerships, and we're testing products in locations ripe for their development and application. The entire industry of transportation is taking part. From the biggest aerospace giants to the smallest startups, we're creating the impossible. Just like the forefathers of aviation who created the aerospace industry as the world sees it today, the leaders in this room are creating the aviation industry that will be seen tomorrow. We're continuing the ascent. Let's go up.
That gives you kind of an idea of the folks and the products that were all being discussed there at that event. So I'm going to quickly hit some of the more interesting products here. A couple of Larry Page's products, Kitty Hawk, which is more of an ultralight that showed up, I think it was about a year ago. In fact, they announced on the day of Uber Elevate, so it was about a year and a half ago. The one on the right, and then the Cora. Cora is being tested down in New Zealand, actually doing passenger trips as we speak, with taking off vertically and flying a significant amount of distance. The Cora strategy is an interesting one because I think we're going to see this service, this business happen much sooner than many of the folks that just mentioned their predictions on stage internationally, where the regulatory environments are significantly less burdensome, and New Zealand is one of the leaders there. The one that's probably the most interesting to me is Opener. This was a program that was in development for 10 years, also backed by Larry Page, and here's just a quick little video of the Blackline. Going back to the thesis earlier about drones and the UI experience being what it is, many of the pilots that were shown here had spent about 30 minutes training before they flew these things. So talk about removing a huge barrier to entry. Quick highlights of the Opener timeline. The company's been in development for 10 years. This didn't just happen. Some interesting statistics. This was reported at our event. 40 man-hours to build the Blackfly. It's going to cost about the price of a SUV, and it will be here next year. Those are breathtaking pieces of information as it relates to a product that anybody can jump into and can fly 60 knots and go 30 miles. So I think the regulatory environment from an airspace perspective is probably what's going to be most interesting, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow, but this gets me fired up when I think about how quickly this is coming. Particularly interesting is not the 800-pound gorilla, in my opinion, the 16,000-pound gorilla. When you partner up Porsche SE and Airbus, they are collaborating on Pop That Up, Vahana. Mark Osman is here from Airbus, who's running the Vahana project. And then you throw in Blade and their investment in Blade and owning this entire ecosystem. Blade is pretty much Uber Elevate today, but just with helicopters. And I think we're going to hear from Rob in a little bit about what they're doing. Incredible stuff. They just need the right product, and I think the products are coming. Joby, again, this is what's publicly been shown about the Joby product, but these guys are so far along, and I'm so excited, and I can't wait to have this show up in all of our backyards. And hopefully we'll hear more about that. Lilium, a little bit was talked about them earlier. Since I'm running out of time, I'll just hit a couple more. This one's really cool. They just announced Karman. They're solving a different problem. They said, hey, this whole battery thing is probably not going to be solved in the time frame that you think. So they're doing a strategy using wires and then a drone that hooks up to the mothership with enough battery to go do the last mile stuff. United Therapeutics is the company that Martine Rothblatt owns, is the company that manufactures organs. And the idea is she wants to use eVTOL as a platform to transport time-sensitive organs to hospitals. And is supporting a number of programs. There's one program in particular that was just announced, unveiled out of Stealth at the Bentonville event. It's a company called Beta out of the Northeast. Very cool company. They've taken a Lancer experimental airplane and applied some pretty neat, unique technology and have got effectively eVTOL flying today with people in it. Keep a very close eye on Beta. Really, really smart team, and they've got some pretty neat technology. Let me just jump into one more company that is pretty cool. This company called X-Wing. They are focusing on autonomy, and pretty much Aurora was the real main game when it came to autonomy up until recently from what I've been able to see, and now that Boeing owns them. It's great to see a new company like X-Wing come into play. They just raised recently and came out of stealth mode, and here's just a quick little video on them. Incredible AI and collision detection technology. ADS-B data, transponder data, cellular data, and superimposing all that to create an awareness about where impeding traffic is. Super cool stuff. I live in Santa Monica. For those of you who haven't been in around on these e-scooters, they're freaking everywhere, and they're amazing. And it's incredible how quickly this happened. In a matter of roughly a year or so, we went from an interesting idea to a multi-billion-dollar company, and each one of them being multi-billion-dollar companies. I would venture to say that this model, the bird sort of experience, is likely what we're going to see sooner rather than later as it relates to eVTOL. The regulatory environment is very different, a la the ultralight pathway. Again, that may change. But I'd like to encourage everybody to consider what would be the most ultimate form of freedom and mobility as it relates to flight. What would be around you? What would that look like? What would that feel like? And it's not that different from this, and I'll show you an example of what that might look like. So this was demonstrated at our event, accompanied by Name of Gravity. Imagine this is how you're going from one meeting to the next. Imagine that you have complete autonomy and freedom to take off from where you're standing and landing wherever you need to go. Now granted, these are jet-powered with gas and turbine engines, but if we continue to see where battery technology is going, it's not that far of a stretch to see that humans may have the capacity to fly without anything, and we actually get to live in the world of Iron Man. And I hope I get to see that, and I hope that each of you get to experience something like this one way, shape, or form. And my guess is some of the folks in the room are going to be the ones that develop that. So with that, I appreciate all the time. I know I'm over, and I'll hand it back to Allie.